On 15 February 2022, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, made it voluntary for India Inc. to separate the post of chairperson from that of the managing director or chief executive officer. SEBI's U-turn came weeks ahead of the 1st April 2022 deadline, by which time the top 500 listed firms by market value had been mandated to install two separate and unrelated persons as chairman and MD or CEO. According to Prime Infobase, SEBI's reprieve will benefit over 150 companies that have the same individual as chairperson and MD or CEO at present. In its editorial, Business Standard has said that SEBI's decision to convert the mandate into a voluntary exercise defied logic. One has to unpack the details of the whole affair to understand why such an assessment was made. First, a brief timeline. The mandate was one of the key recommendations by a SEBI committee on corporate governance in 2017. Subsequently, SEBI amended listing regulations in 2018 and stipulated that the chairman's post must be a non-executive one and, additionally, the chairman and MD must not be related. The original deadline for complying with this mandate was 1st April 2020. However, by December 2020, only 53% of companies had made the transition. This prompted a postponement to 1st April 2022. India Inc. showed reluctance in complying with this governance requirement despite the fact that the rule was initially proposed 5 years ago and approved by SEBI 4 years ago. Given the time frame involved, the market regulator's reason for this relaxation, which is the low compliance levels by the companies, is untenable. Clearly, the corporations concerned had ample time to make these changes, which is a fact that SEBI seems to have overlooked. Secondly, we must understand the logic behind splitting the CMD position. Globally, keeping the two offices separate is seen as a key corporate governance requirement. This is because while the chairman of a company is the head of the board, the company's MD is in charge of daily operations and has to report to the said board. Keeping the two offices separate will enable effective supervision of the management and reduce excessive concentration of authority in a single individual. By splitting these roles, a company can not only secure its own interests and those of its shareholders, but also of the CMD themselves, because it embeds clarity with regard to responsibility and accountability across the whole organization.
Any corporation has got 3 layers of control, 3 layers of governance. At the top is the shareholder, who are the supreme body. Just below the shareholder is the board. The board works as per the direction of the shareholder. Then below the board is the management, which works at the direction of board. Now, there is some sort of a joining links between these 3 layers. Now, what happens when you have the same executive which is leading the management and also leading the board? So the differentiation which is intended between the 3 different layers becomes blurred. It is desirable as a good governance practice to separate. Now, what happened in India, the people found it difficult to implement for their own reasons. We can always argue that things could be done in steps, but then problem is the intent. If my intent is not to follow, then you may do it in different phases. I will still find an excuse. It all depends upon the investors who are voting in these companies. See, if the investors start voting against such appointment, then even without the law, probably the companies will implement it. There would be no law. I always say that the law are needed because those who are responsible for bringing good governance are not doing good governance. Yeah. Most of the law that SEBI or MC have made probably would not be needed if all the institutional investors and retail investors were exercising their wisdom and participating in the meetings.
At the end of the day, corporate India's giant family-owned and managed groups seem to have won. The whole affair saw hectic lobbying by industry groups. In fact, in 2020, many companies had approached the Prime Minister's office seeking a review of the regulation. Some of them had even pitched for doing away with the requirement altogether. There is a lesson for SEBI in this. it should perhaps have gone for a gradual approach to reforms. There could have been more success in separating the posts of the chairman and MD if Sebi had not also insisted that the chairman and MD should not be related. Note that the latter was not a requirement in the committee recommendations in 2017, but Sebi's stipulation that the chairman and MD should not be related was unexceptionable in principle. Perhaps it should have been cognizant of the fact that company owners in India tend to leverage the MD's position as a grooming ground for successors in their family. In trying to get both the provisions through at the same time, Sebi might have ended up making the perfect the enemy of the good. The regulator could have introduced the relative clause at a later date, after the separation of posts was complete.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.